All right. By way of introduction, Alexis originally proposed the idea of, what was it? You said something about drills having a bad name.
That was
Is that what you're? That was that. Okay.
What was that again?
What do we say? I don't know.
It's a dirty word. Yeah, drills are a dirty word. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we thought that maybe that alone, but I think that probably hits on the concept we're kind of dealing with here. So we'll see where it takes us. I'm guessing you guys probably talked about this a little bit. Did you have a starting point in mind?
We did.
Yeah.
Dan was going to start.
I was going to start. I think drill, even when we start talking about this, the word drill is such a loaded concept to me. Like the phrase has so many connotations around it that, I mean, our goal from today is at the end of this that we think about how we make drills more effective, and we also rethink almost our definition of drills in that way. So it's really about effectiveness and being efficient with our time is really the goal from today. But when we first start talking about drills, we've lost Alexis already. My definition of a drill starts off with the coach giving a long set of instructions, some cones, a long line of people, and a repeated task that we do over and over again with, success or no success. But it sort of, when I think of drills, I have this really negative connotation around cones, drills, and lines as a starting point. And therefore, when I think of drills, that's why I think of drills being a dirty word, because I just find that to be such a ineffective way to learn sport and specific tasks within sport.
Oops, and Alexis just came in, I think, using the wrong link. Yeah, let me see if I can promote him. Unless he, here he comes. I think I would tend to agree with you just in terms of when you think there would seem to be a clear differentiation between games, which sound a lot more fun, and drills, which just sound a lot more like work.
Yeah.
And not fun.
Yeah.
Which is probably why some people have taken to trying to flip us around to grills, which is I think are supposed to be game like drill.
I've never heard that phrase before. That's a new one.
I don't know if it's necessarily in popular usage, but it do seem from time to time. No. Actually, I definitely didn't come up with that. I think it was a VCT thing where I saw it probably.
I'm fairly confident I know where you got to without me. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. It's interesting. I'm kind of a big believer in just changing the names of things from time to time, because common usage ends up completely changing what the original definition was. Like what does elite mean? Elite's just the badge you have on a shirt nowadays. It doesn't really mean anything in the same way that it used to. I might draw the line at grills, though. I'm not completely sure about that. But I think what Dan was probably saying is even when we discussed it between ourselves, we realised we had completely different definitions of what a drill was. Because for me, basically anything you do at training is a drill. There's competitions and there's practice, and in practice you do drills. And if that drill is having 6-on-6 normal volleyball rules, then it's still a drill. And it's very unlikely that you would actually do that. Maybe you would, but you'd probably throw an extra ball in or do something else, which sort of clearly then makes it a drill. It's a gameplay kind of drill, but it's still a drill. And so Dan's definition of cones on the ground and 10 people lining up while one person does something is probably the more common mental image of a drill, would you say? but it's not really it's not what I was thinking at all about when we were talking about this particular topic.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I don't like drills is because of that definition that I have in my mind of what they are, which is standing in a line and doing a task. And I guess the first thing that being part of your training does is it separates whatever skill you're trying to work on from any sort of concept of reality or any sort of practical use of that skill, technique, lesson that you want to teach your athletes. And so the quicker that we can get people out, we're having a crazy day, no? The quicker we can get away from that sort of repetitious rope learning, sort of segmented part of the skill, the better.
Yeah, and from the way I always look at it is you want the drill to be as close to real game as possible. And sometimes that might, if you're working with someone who just doesn't understand that every single time they're passing, they're bending their elbows, sometimes that might be a long way from a real game or what it looks like in a real scenario, but you still want it to be as close as you can, no matter what. So, for example, I obsess maybe is the wrong word, but little things like if you're doing some just really fundamental passing platform work or fundamental moving to the ball kind of stuff, then face the net, because that's where the ball is going to come from. So if you're just in pairs, one person's throwing the ball to the other person, have the person throwing the ball to the passer so that the passer is facing the net. It's not very game-like what you're doing at all. There is definitely a purpose to it, but make it as close to real as you possibly can. Throw it from above your head rather than below, whatever it might be, so that you're creating as much of a link as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's where we quickly want to get to with our drills, that whatever we're doing, I think purposeful is such a good phrase, because I think sometimes we use drills because that's what we're used to, or that's what we've done in the past, or that's almost the standard thing of what we do. And the quicker we have a really clear understanding of our purpose of a task, the better. And I think sometimes drills are an easy way to almost work on really broad things like serving or control or, footwork, without really thinking about the actual part within that skill that we actually want to work on. What is it about footwork that we want to improve? What is it about serving that we want to improve? What is it about our ball control we want to improve? And I sometimes think that we use sort of we almost rely on the drill to teach them everything, rather than challenging ourselves to design a task that challenges the athlete to solve the problem that they're looking for.
Yeah, and that's like I remember the first coaches course I ever went to, the presenter had a book, I think it was 101 drills or maybe 1,001 drills, this big thick book, and he made a point of throwing it into the bin, a trash can for our American friends, and said, work out what you need to do and then work out a drill that does it. And that made complete sense to me at the time. And so when people ask me about drills, I never really know how to answer, because I don't know how many people there are, what your team is like, what your skills are, what your facilities are like. I can't really just give you a drill that will fix it. It doesn't make sense to me, because I don't know the context, and the drill has to have context to be as valuable as it can be.
Yeah, you see it through all the strength and conditioning work as well, and like a lot of the Instagram stuff is about, I'm using this drill right now. This is the exercise that gets the change that I'm looking for. This is the bit that makes the difference. And it's like, well, maybe it does, but I find it hard to believe that this one drill that you've invented solves all the challenges that you're talking about. Yes, it might answer a small specific area that you're trying to work on, but to say that this drill is the answer to all of our problems is patently untrue as far as I'm concerned. And really it's about, and the quicker we realize that, and then the quicker we think about our drills as things that we design, things that we shape, and almost, we don't have to do it the way that we did it before if that's not the specific thing we're trying to get better at.
Yeah, and there's a real, it's got to make sense, and you've got to critique it. So did it achieve what I wanted it to achieve? And there's what's that book about biases? That basically tells you that every single thought that goes through your head is a bias. Sorry?
Thinking fast and slow, Kahneman.
That's right. There's so many biases that you have to fight through, and one of the primary ones is that coaches don't like chaos. And also people that walk into gyms and see chaos think that that's a bad thing. So coaches tend to like drills to look neat and for it to be executed well, so that the drill actually looks nice and clean and you can see that good things are happening. And there's a really great line I liked that I heard a while ago, is that closed drills are for confidence, open drills are for learning. So closed drills are drills where there's no real interaction with the real world. There's very, very specific thing that you have to do at a very, very specific time. They'll often involve cones and lines of people and coaches throwing balls very accurately to very specific places. None of which happens on the court. Now, there's definitely value to those things. And we'll talk a bit more later, but is it the most that you can get out of it? And are you teaching what needs to happen in a game? And the problem with open drills is everything goes wrong in open drills. So instead of having a coach toss a ball to a very specific place and an athlete start their approach when the coach yells go, if the coach tosses a ball to a setter and the athlete has to decide when to go and the ball maybe isn't in exactly the right place every time, things can break down really, really quickly. But that's actually what happens in a game. So it doesn't look like you're achieving as much, but you're learning so much more about the actual game. So again, you want it to be as close as you can to real. In a real situation, the setter is also a 13-year-old who's learning how to set this particular ball, but that's actually the person who's going to be setting it to you in a game. So you need to get your timing from that setter, who is very inconsistent. You need to be able to somehow get the ball over the net, not just hit it perfectly when it happens to be there. And you're learning how to actually play the game rather than execute the drill.
Yeah, it's Tom Tate that I interviewed for Volleyball Coaching Wizards. He talked about how he had come from track into coaching volleyball and was asked to take over the programs at Penn State back in the 70s. And it talked about how his teams were fantastic practice teams. He said they could out-practice anybody, but they couldn't beat anybody in a game because they didn't train to play the game. They trained to look good in practice. And it actually, that whole discussion got me thinking back in terms of maybe the potential derivation of where drill came from was in a military context, drill is the marching and the formations and all that stuff, which is intended to be very clean, very precise, follow specific directions. And I can easily see how drills in a sporting context may have migrated over from that military, because let's face it, a lot of coaching style reflected very old military, like basic training type styles and approaches, in terms of authoritarian and directed action and yelling and screaming and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few colleagues in the military around, they believe that that's the way to teach athletes things and the way to teach soldiers things through that, that repetition, that there's one way to do things. And we sort of got on a discussion that the reason that they do it that way is they want a huge group of people to be able to do their sole task to a very standardized a level that's not particularly high and not particularly specific. They just want, the average person to be able to do this task so they can rely on them to do that. But when we're talking about athletes, we're actually talking about quite a different thing, is that we're not generally trying to raise the floor to this very, very fundamental level. And when we do, we're maybe talking about kids or something that we're just trying to get them sort of into the ballpark. But very quickly we move beyond that to this. We're actually trying to get the best out of these individuals for them to, almost express themselves through the sport, to be able to, solve the problems as they go. Whereas in the military, they don't want their grunt soldiers to solve the problems as they come up, because they want them just to do what they're told. So they're actually teaching them in that way for a different reason. Mm-hmm. And so if we take that approach to our sport, we'll get pretty much the baseline sort of people doing things because that's what they're told, rather than solving the problems of the game.
And it's a real challenge. Like, I work in gymnastics at the moment, and there's definite safety issues. So you need to have some sort of discipline in the gym, and people need to just stop if they get told to stop, and organise themselves really quickly. So there's real reasons in sport to do that. But it also got me thinking, Dan, I know someone that spent some time, it was a documentary, I think. It was a documentary on Navy SEALs, or one of those elite American military units, where they actually talked about the fact that at that level, when they have highly difficult things that require high levels of coordination and trust and all of that, they just go away from all of the military stuff. So they can wear whatever they want, right? Whoever comes up with a good idea can have that idea. People need to make decisions and act. And it's when you're actually trying to succeed at the highest level rather than manage large numbers of people, it's actually the independence and the creativity and the stuff that risks chaos, but enables much higher levels of success.
100%. Yep, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Having said that, in terms of looking good in training, I do remember the first national champs I ever coached was with under 17 boys, and for a couple of weeks beforehand, we practiced what we were going to do on the warm-up day, so that we would look good in front of everyone else. It was very important to me at the time. So I do understand.
I think every team I've ever worked with has practiced a little bit, at least, pre-game warm-up. Just so when they get there the day of, there's first off, you're not wasting time, because that's usually a factor. But second, everybody knows what's going on. There's a comfort. They're able to relax into the process without, okay, what do we do next? How long are we doing this for? Where do I go now? And all that. Yeah. There's already enough jitters before a match. You don't need to add to it by having no organization and just confusion beforehand. But that's a different thing.
Even that's a really, I mean, again, Dan and I in preparation, we discussed this yesterday. When I was working in college in the States, we had these warm-ups that seemed to last forever. I feel like they lasted for 90 minutes plus or something. I've no idea why.
Yes.
Plus, you had already done a 7 pass for an hour earlier in the day. But it was crazy to me that we didn't just get the athletes to do something rather than have the coaches the coaches do all of the hitting and the tossing and everything, because effectively you've got an extra hour of practice if the athletes are just doing stuff. And so we're doing defensive drills with, instead of coaches at the sticks hitting, we had athletes at the sticks hitting, and you realise really quickly just how bad the athletes are at doing that.
Yes.
They couldn't hit the ball with their hand. And so it was really challenging because, well, we want the practice to look good. We want the warm-up to look good, but why does a warm-up need to look good?
Yeah.
And it's a really great example of the open for confidence, closed for learning. I mean, we decided that we wanted to use that time for athletes to learn.
Oh, you just reversed it, Alexis.
Sorry?
Closed for confidence, open for learning.
Closed for confidence, open for learning. We decided that we wanted it open for them to learn so that we could use that time to get better. But the trade-off is we may have affected the confidence of the athletes going into a game. But that's
definitely a trade-off.
That's definitely short-term, and so long-term usually trumps short-term as far as I'm concerned. That's a whole other discussion.
It's funny that idea that you need to have confidence before you start a game, and that
I know that's a whole other thing.
that you'd be willing to spend half an hour to build their confidence with the knowledge that, like, I wonder what the staying power of that confidence is, beyond the first 3 points or something. I feel like that surely that confidence changes almost immediately when you see the other person do their first serve, and you're like, oh. Uh-oh, there goes my confidence. Or you play that first shot, and I feel like that's got a much bigger shape on your confidence for the game than the half hour that you did just jumping around and high-fiving and smacking a ball into the ground and feeling really proud of yourself. I would
actually flip it around from my perspective, and people can disagree with this. I tended to think of structuring pregame to try to avoid things that might knock down confidence going into the match.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I really grew to dislike over the years was that defensive practice, that coaches or players or whoever's hitting balls at people, and you got 3 people on the court, and it's fine if everybody's digging the ball and it's looking like it's going toward target and people are filling in properly, but as soon as balls are hitting the floor, you're like, okay, this is not good. This is not the way. This is not the mentality I want my team going into a match with. So, along with the length of time stuff with the college warm-ups, what can I do? And this brings up a whole other conversation about recovery and energy and all that sort of stuff. Why do we need to spend minimum 45 minutes warming up for a match?
All right. That John, is something that is a topic for another day.
Yes.
But just what you said is the perfect example. Coaches don't like chaos. And
it wasn't chaos. It wasn't chaos. It was more when I initially had the issue with it. I was using it as a gauge, a mentality gauge of the players. Because if the players weren't going for the ball, then I usually knew we were not going to do well in this match. There was something that wasn't right.
That's a different thing to balls hitting the ground, though.
Well, if the balls are hitting the ground because the players aren't going for it, that was the issue.
Sure. But all of it's. And again, if we get back to the definition of a drill, those warm-ups to me, they're still a drill. I mean, it's not competition. And if it's competition isn't a drill. But warm-ups, they're just drills. And so you want to work out what you want to get out of them. Work out how to get the absolute most out of them that you can, most number of things in the smallest amount of time. And then be okay with that, and then trust yourself and back yourself. And if it looks bad one day, then okay. If it looks bad the next day, and then check. Warm-up looked really bad. Oh, actually, but we played pretty well. Maybe that's okay.
Oh, I've seen a lot of those. We used to joke about it. The worse your warm-up, the better your your match. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that gets back to when you think about training design in general. If you can properly justify sort of what you're doing and why you're doing it, then there's no real such thing as something that you're doing wrong. As long as you've thought about what you're doing rather than just almost, flipping the book and grabbing this drill because this will work on this, on hitting, this will work on serving, this will work on passing. It's like, as long as you put a bit more thought into it than that, then I don't think you can go too far wrong, as long as you keep in your mind that these aren't set things that I have to follow. This is a guide that I can follow to then react with my players, and, I can shift the difficulty up or down if I need to. I can change things around to get to work on this if this is going this way or this is going this way. So a lot of time, what I think about when we design drills is that in our heads we already need to have the way. If this is going this way, then I have my adjustment that I can make to the drill to make it change, to change what I want to do. If it's going this way, I already know the adjustment that I can make to change it. I can move people further apart, or I can change the angle that they're hitting to, or I can change the size of the target that they're hitting at. So I can, in my mind, I'm not doing a drill, I'm working on a skill, and I'm manipulating the task that they're doing constantly to get the outcome that I continually want.
Yeah, and that's the outcomes are the important things. Achieving the outcome, and it starts from there. It doesn't start with the technique. I was a long time ago. I worked out that skill and technique are two completely different things. Technique is being able to do certain body movements in a completely isolated environment, but skill is to be able to do that functionally in a live environment. And learning technique doesn't necessarily learn skill at the same time. Mm-hmm. But you can learn skill at the same time as technique. So if you've got 1 hour to do things and you can learn 2 things during that time instead of 1, then to me it's a pretty simple thing. We tend to get obsessed over technique. And volleyball isn't gymnastics. In gymnastics, you lose a point if technique isn't perfect. In volleyball, you don't. You can do something absolutely horrible and still win the point. But what you need is functional technique. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be competent. So you need technical competency. And so if I often sort of see on blog posts and stuff where people are talking about, so I don't want everyone to be robots. I don't want them all to look the same. It's like, well, I teach everyone I've ever taught to pass the same. I teach the same cues, but none of them look the same. I wish I was a good enough coach to have them all look the same, but there's no way. If you're focusing on every single tiny little movement, then maybe you can achieve that, but you don't need that. You just need it to be competent so that there isn't anything that will repetitively cause the skill to break down. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that comes into that fundamental principle of, if you constantly try to teach technique, you'll find yourself sort of disappointed because you're trying to fit someone into a certain look. Whereas if you're constantly trying to teach people to solve a problem or to achieve a task, then you'll usually be quite pleasantly surprised that they'll do what they need to do. And if they're using a technique which you know is going to fail, you can redesign your drill or your task so that it requires that technique that you so truly believe is going to result in success or not. And so if you're building something, if you're building a task, you can define it so that the technique that you know is going to work long term is required in that drill. And usually when it's not, it's because the task is too easy and they don't need to use the technique that they need to achieve the task. Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is, if you design it right, they have to use the right technique to succeed.
There's one of my favourite examples goes back 25 years. I was working with a group of young guys, probably 17, 18, and we're trying to work on hitting sharper cross court. And so the drill was, there were a couple of people on one side, there was one hitter, and I think maybe they had 5 swings, and they got 5 bonus points every time they got a kill hitting past the inside blocker. And then everyone had to go through, and it was against a full defence, I think. Some sort of drill like that. I don't remember exactly. And so that was the drill. And so the idea is, okay, we're encouraging people to hit cross court so they can work out for themselves how to do that. So we're not breaking it down and telling them to take the ball outside their body, inside their body, talk about midline, working out where their last step is, whether it's 45 degrees or 50 degrees or 90 degrees, or just want them, we're just giving them the outcome, rewarding them for achieving that outcome and letting them work out how to do it. That's technical training. The athletes don't know that it's technical training, but it is. That particular example became problematic because one of the guys, when he was blocking in the middle, would just stay where he was. He wouldn't move to the outside to block. And so the hitter who was hitting against him could only score points if he was hitting past the middle blocker, hitting inside the middle blocker. And so he couldn't score points because the middle blocker was still in the middle of the court. And so that was fantastic. So fantastic. I still remember who it was. Fantastic work, Matt. Really, really smart blocking. You won that drill. Okay. Next time the rules are going to be that you have to move to the outside to block. Okay. But the creativity and the problem solving was fantastic and never would have happened in a drill where you've just got people standing there and you're tossing balls and they have to hit cross court. And so the opportunities that you miss from doing very, very blocked, unrealistic drills are enormous.
Well, and the thing that I would throw in, and it's speaking to the player motivation in this, which is something that you have to account for throughout the whole drill, game, exercise, whatever you want to call it.
I thought if the players weren't motivated, you just made them run.
Yeah. How about incentivized? Okay, we'll change it from incentive to motivation to incentive. A lot of coaches will default to focusing on the player or players involved in the skill that is the intention of the drill. Like you said, in your case, that's the hitter. But we have to also realize that there are other players involved who have their own incentives and motivations. The middle blocker, in your case, he's got an incentive to, I don't know, maybe he doesn't want the other guys, maybe he doesn't like the other guy, doesn't want him scoring points.
No, he wants to win. The middle blocker wants to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
So I don't know exactly. And so there's that competitive point sort of thing, which is can tend to be fairly easy to recognize. It's like, all right, the defenders are going to do a thing. They know the ball's going to go in a certain place, so maybe they already cheat to a position that they know the ball's going to get hit to or something like that. But there's more, I just lost the term that I wanted to use, insidious. Here's insidious stuff when you're doing things like counting drills where you've got a target of good passes or something like that. And this is where the classic butterfly drill comes in to the equation for me and why I don't like it. The butterfly drill, for those who are not aware, or at least one variation of it, the one that I always saw, is you've basically got a server, target, passer on both sides. So you've got players that are winding around. Server goes to pass, passer goes to target goes to serve, yada, yada, yada. And oftentimes there's some sort of objective, okay, the team has to get X number of good passes out of this thing. Well, what's the inherent motivation in this exercise? As a coach, you're going to say, well, it's to get to 30. Okay, sure. If that's your goal, that's your goal. The players, unless they really, really love butterfly drills, which I'm guessing they probably don't, their motivation is to get out of the drill.
John's just dropped out for me. Can anyone else hear him?
I've still got him.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
So okay, to catch Alexis up, the motivation of players in a lot of drills is to finish the drill, to get out of the drill.
Yeah.
So they're going to do things to facilitate that happening. So in a butterfly drill or in a lot of servers and passers sorts of things, the servers are de-incentivized to serve game-like, tough balls to their teammates because it slows down getting out of the drill, which is the ultimate motivation. So now you've got receivers who are passing essentially lollipop balls. Okay, you may have one or two players on the team who it's just their mentality. They're going to go full bore every single time. Great. If you have a team full of those, okay, don't worry about it. But let's face it, a lot of us are working with youth players and they don't have that mentality. Maybe they haven't developed it yet. And they're going to do whatever they think gets them out of the drill quick. Now, and we have to account for those things when we structure those just as much as we might have to account for
Now I've lost it.
John's frozen this time.
involve point scoring when you're playing a game.
Yeah. Look, the butterfly drill is a great example because everything that you've said, John, is completely fine by me. Because the purpose of the butterfly drill is just to get people moving, get balls in the air so people are having to track the balls, execute some skills well, and generally you want them to finish as soon as they can. You don't want to be stuck there forever. You don't want to give them an unachievable task because you want to then be able to get out of that and do something a little bit more specific or more realistic. It's a fine general warm up. It's a decent use of space and resources. So as long as you don't think that the intent is that you're working on service reception, because you're not, then it's fine. And it might be, for your particular team, the best use of time and resources, time and space. So the drills, and again, the topic of the thing is making drills in training effective, getting the most out of your time. To me, it's just always about time. There's a point at which you can't just organise extra trainings. In college, you can't, at least not legally. In clubs and high schools you probably can't. Clubs, I don't know what the rules are. But you've got to, the focus of training has got to be, how do I get the most I possibly can out of every moment? And sometimes the most might be an incredibly basic drill on fundamental technique, because that's really, really important. But as long as you're conscious of that and you're conscious of getting the most out of it. And simplest example for me is always pepper. I guarantee you'll absolutely get better at playing volleyball by doing lots of pepper. Right? There is much evidence of that over the history of the sport, but there's more effective uses of your time and space. As soon as you add a third person in, then you're changing the direction of the ball, which is what you have to do almost every single time you play the ball in volleyball. So it has to be a more effective use of your time. So it's like when we talked about effective communication for coaches. There are lots of things that will work. We know that they will work from experience and anecdotes and history. The question is, can we get more out of the same period of time? Can we get more out of the resources that we have? And that's when it comes back to making it look as close to real as you can. Sometimes that might be a long way away from real, but most of the time it isn't.
But and like you said, even with a simple drill like the pepper drill, you can add things to that task just to make it a little bit more effective. So just instead of just doing the drill, you can add like a level of competition in. You can add a few more specificities, say around like the the heat that you put behind your hits, or how accurately you have to deliver the pass, or demanding that certain footwork is required. So you can have
competition for the most number of things. I sometimes in drills like that I'll do because I coach beach volleyball, so sometimes there is only 2 people at training. I'll do drills where they've got to get a certain number of touches within a time frame. So they actually have to get really close and play the ball really quickly and small. So you can manipulate it to make it more effective. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so it becomes it's not about just taking this drill and seeing that as the answer. It's about manipulating it to get what you want out of it for the athletes.
Okay, so question for the expert then, Dan. With something like Pepper, which what's the balance of letting people just do it and explore and find their own solutions? And even as a coach, you see chaos because you see people hitting the ball too hard so that the defender or their partner can't dig it, or doesn't have the control, or it doesn't go anywhere near them. They spend most of the time chasing after the ball. But there's benefit to that in terms of athlete exploration and problem solving.
So if you
go on.
So if you let athletes explore things, then they'll ultimately learn things better. They'll actually learn them at a depth that shows itself in games, and it shows itself under pressure. So if you learn things intuitively through your experience, that's how you truly learn the skill, and how it then sort of emerges when you need it during a pressure situation. So the reason that we like experienced athletes on our teams is because they've had experiences throughout their career or their playing time that they've had a moment that has taught them something, and then they've truly learned that, and then it continues to show itself. So we tend to wait for matches or occurrences for these learning effects to happen. And that's why we then rely on our experienced athletes. But we can actually design our training, and the way you described it as there being multiple failures, them being unable to control a ball that simply hit that hard. If we actually give them those experiences, they can learn how to solve them themselves. And that's how you get your better learning. So, I mean, for me, I would prefer to see athletes failing during their task than succeeding, to the point, as long as they're still somewhat engaged, as long as if it's too hard, they'll disengage, but almost failing at the maximum amount that they can fail while they're still engaged in the task, because that's sort of where the difficulty of the task is right, and that's also where it's where the difficulty of the task is set right, and it's where the engagement of the athlete is the best. They're trying to solve a problem that they're almost figuring out but can't quite, and really that's the essence of learning for me. You're at that precipice where I can't quite solve this, but I almost can, so I'm engaged in the task of solving a problem, but I don't have the answer yet. Most of our stuff is done in lots of success, 90% of success, and I fail once, and you're not really learning at that point, you're just doing.
Yeah, Karch has talked about in the women's national team, Jim, anyway. I don't know if Sparrow feels the same way, but they essentially try to get to about a 1 in 3 failure rate on the reps in their gym. They think that's that tipping point for them. Now, obviously, that could move up or down depending on the athlete, and even possibly the day or time of year in their cycle. And it all just kind of reminded me also of the mentality of the athletes, and how John Kessel talks about how having a son and a daughter who played volleyball, if the daughter made 1 mistake out of 5, she was going to fixate on that 1 mistake out of 5. Whereas if the son made 4 mistakes out of 5 but got a kill on the other one, he was going to fixate on the one thing he got right, not all the rest. So there's going to be athlete level differences to account for as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to play with a guy that if he killed the last ball of the game, then he had a good game. No doubt at all.
But yeah, it's funny that we still to this day associate success in training with good. And I still associate, as a skill acquisition scientist, I still associate success at training with not learning. I would still prefer to see people making mistakes than I would prefer them to see them succeeding. Because then I think that they're actually trying to learn something. As long as they're trying, of course.
Now, Daniel, is there some research, though, that runs counter to that idea? Because I've seen some stuff tossed around in coaching circles about success driving motivation. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got these competing things. You've got essentially the failure and the challenge is driving the athletes to find new solutions to the task. So if you're doing your technique and it's not working, you're forced to find a new technique which is going to give you the answer to the problem. So you're forcing them to find a better technique to solve the problem. But conversely, if it's too hard and you're not getting any success, well then you're not finding the answer. So that's why our job as coaches is to narrow that. I guess almost getting back to Alexis' original question, our goal is to narrow that to know how much success does this person need to keep engaged with the process of finding a solution. That's the challenge that we're on.
And the coach has a huge impact in that as well, by knowing the athletes and recognising when they're learning and when they've made a change. The change might not be successful, but if it's the change that you know that they need to make, then you have the opportunity to step in and remind them that was good. And that's really hard because they will just see that the outcome was still wrong.
A lot of the time. You're right, Alexis. A lot of that's built around the way you shape the task before you even do it. You know, if you say, I expect you to fail 50% of the time in this drill, but I also expect you to find a better answer, and I'm going to give you encouraging feedback, and your teammates aren't going to judge you for failing, that's a completely different way to approach a task than just to approach it normally, and then to make a mistake and, you know, to feel embarrassed in front of their teammates. It's a very different thing. So the way you shape it also affects the interaction and the engagement of the athletes.
And so to get back to the idea of the drill has to look as close to real as you can make it, but sometimes that's still a long way away from real. Like I said, if you've got 12 players of training, then you can make something look very real because basically you're doing some sort of scrimmage or wash drill, you're chucking a ball over and you've got some sort of constraints. By the way, what we're talking about is also known as constraints-based learning. It's also known as game sense. It's also known as teaching games for understanding. Have I missed any, Dan?
Representative design.
Ecological validity sounds good. I like that one. So these are all just terms for what we talk about, like sensible, logical drills that are game-like, that are teaching what's required in games. So one of the challenges that I think happens in the States a lot is what about when you've got individuals and you've got one athlete, and especially at the moment with people being able to get back into the gym, maybe with only one athlete at a time. What sort of things do you think you can consider, Dan, to make the drill as game-like with just one athlete?
To me, the greatest thing to make anything game-like is have a consequence. Like if you want somebody to be engaged with a task, then having some sort of consequence and engagement with the task is your key goal. If the athlete's engaged with what you're doing and is sort of thinking through volleyball while they're doing it, then to me that's the most important thing with any sort of drill you do. If they're doing a movement, if they're almost just doing a movement because that's what they do, then to me that's the worst type of training we can have.
Okay. So how much, I worked with someone once. I was doing one-on-one setting drill, or she was a setter, and I was trying to make it interesting because for me, part of the reason part of what I like about coaching is creating drills, and doing boring, mindless drills makes training really boring and mindless for me. So I just don't do them. So I had a single athlete, and she was getting back to setting after a knee surgery, and so we were doing all sorts of things to make it interesting. So I do things like she'd serve, then she'd have to go to a defensive position, do some sort of defensive move, and then I'd toss a couple of balls in for her to set, all trying to replicate the normal flow of a game. So not rapid fire, but if in a situation like this, then the scenario is that the first set gets blocked, someone digs it, and so creating the scenario for the athlete of exactly how this particular series of actions relates to a game. And she got that, and then I started asking her questions, basically to give her to make her have to think about what she'd just done. And so I'd just say, "How was that?" So after each one, "How was that?" So, "Oh well, I mean, on the first set, my hands were here." And so all she was doing was telling me about all of the bad things. So then I started, okay, I'm not interested. I already know that there's lots of bad things. So, okay. So from now on, you have to tell me something that you were happy with before you're allowed to tell me something that you weren't happy with. So how was that? And she stopped. It was like 15 seconds later, she pulled out something that she was kind of happy with. And it really just made me realise what her focus was on. Mm-hmm. And this is something someone had coached for 5 years. So if you're wanting athletes to engage and you're asking them questions, so what are some good ways to do that, do you think, Dan?
Well, I mean, the ultimate version of training is where the athlete is telling you what they want to work on, and they're designing. They basically run the session, and you act as a sounding board to guide them. To me, that's the ultimate learning, where the athlete comes in and says, "I want to work on this today because of this. I want to work on this today because of this. I've thought about this, and I'm going to do this drill and this drill or this exercise because that's what I want to work on, and I want you to give me some feedback on this specific thing." So if that's the holy grail of what you're getting to, then the first step towards that is having them understand why they're doing the task that they're doing and what purpose it's serving. And for me, that's sort of, there's sometimes a conversation that we don't have at the start of a task or a drill that is about, this is what we're working on for this reason, and I want you to explore X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And so...
yeah, and to take it a step further, a lot of times we as coaches lose focus on those things as well. We hopefully have designed an exercise to focus on something that we obviously want to be working on and what the player's working on. But then we let something else take our attention away, and we start providing feedback on something that doesn't relate to what we're supposed to be working on, and or we allow the players to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do we have a hands-up function on this thing? I don't know. I was just thinking, you don't have to do it, but feel free, anyone that's still with us. How many times have you set up a drill and okay, the focus of this drill is, say, hitting cross court. So the focus is hitting cross court. That's what we want to work on. I want you to explore it. This is the target. This is the rules. And then 2 minutes into the drill, in defense, you've got to be here. You've got to do this, and you just start fixing things that you specifically told the group not to focus on within 2 minutes of starting the drill. Maybe don't put your hands up if you don't want to, but it's a real discipline. It really, really is to have that clarity and to keep the athletes focused on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had situations where I've been working really hard on that, and I've been doing that, and I've been giving feedback only on the specific thing that we said that we were worried about. Nothing else in the drill we were worried about. And then an athlete will say, "Okay, so how was that? Said, yeah, I'm working on stepping to my left." It's like, why? Why are you doing that? It now makes sense. Everything that I've been watching for the last 5 minutes now makes sense, because I thought you were focusing on the entire point of this drill, but apparently you're not. And so, but then there's the opportunity to have that conversation. And that only happens, he's only able to answer that question because of a level of trust. And so, okay, well, that's what you're working on. Then here's some feedback on that. Let's just, I'm happy to know what you care about. It's not what I care about, but I also know that you're going to work on what you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, like you were saying, Dan, it's important, and it's not easy to just allow that sometimes.
That athlete engagement and understanding what their motivations are so important. Like it's something that's underrated, with the belief that if I tell someone something or if I design something right, then they're going to learn this. And it doesn't really work like that without the athlete also being on board with what we're trying to change. And so that's where we run into problems with drills and feedback and training design, is that we believe that if you do this, then this is the outcome. When in fact, when you do this, these are the outcomes, and, trying to guess which one is going to happen on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday morning it's vitally different. So for me, the constant theme is that flexibility in what you're doing. The great coaches to me are the ones that have that ability to adapt drills, adapt tasks, adapt design constantly to keep the athletes engaged in the task, to keep the evolution of what's going on at training moving, so we don't fall back into, okay, we're going to do our hitting thing for 5 minutes, then we're going to do our passing thing, and then we're going to do this because that's what we do at training. Instead, training is about constantly challenging athletes at a level appropriate for the day to keep them engaged in, like you said, learning to become better volleyball players, not just become better hitters, setters.
Yeah, and the way to lock down the focus of the athlete and make sure it's what you want them to focus on is to have a really, really, really specific, isolated technical drill. It's the way to lock them down is to give them no choice to think about anything else that they're doing, which is what we have a tendency to do, rather than say, you know what, there's 12 people out here, 3 of them are working on what I want them to work on, 6 of them are working on what they want to work on, but the drill is open enough that there's benefits to the team in all of those different things, and that's a good thing. And now I just need to work out how to get the other 3 to pay any sort of attention to what they're doing.
We've got a couple of questions. I think Carrie's one probably has the most immediate relevance, because I think it kind of deals with the player feedback process. So question starts off with, does making the athlete close their eyes after his or her touches help make the process go faster, as opposed to telling them right and wrong? They're feeling it and noticing the contact touch, so then they will then feel and change sooner.
So for me, Carrie's talking about essentially removing the outcome goal from the athlete, so that they're then focused on their internal feedback, not the external feedback of the task. For me, removing the outcome of results can help in some regards, but I wouldn't use it that commonly because I think athletes like to know the outcome. I think our challenge as a coach is to help them reflect, not only reflect, they're going to get the outcome anyway, but help them reflect internally on what did they feel to get that ball or that movement in the place that it ended up. So I sometimes feel they need that outcome in order to relate it to their internal behaviours.
Because also, I think there's a huge risk in telling someone who put the ball where they know it's supposed to go, but not in the way that you wanted them to, that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ball went where it was supposed to go. It might have been blind luck, right? But if it was blind luck, there's going to be plenty of examples of where they did the same thing and it didn't go to the right place to give them feedback on.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to be able to work out why.
Well, yeah, I would suspect that a process like this one could actually help you. Maybe, Daniel, as you said, maybe you only use it very, very infrequently, but it can help the reflection process, help stimulate the reflection process. Mm-hmm. is what I mean. Yeah,
that's the intention. But I think and I've done stuff. I remember doing stuff years ago with occlusion goggles, where you could just, as soon as the pass was made, we'd have it so that the player couldn't see where it went, and then we'd ask them why. But I think what Dan said is part of understanding whether or not the skill is competent is knowing the outcome.
The thing I liked most about the question was that not telling them what went wrong and not telling them what they should feel, but instead asking them where they felt or what they felt, I think is the important thing. So whenever we tell them, if we tell an athlete, your elbow wasn't straight enough or your hand was in the wrong place, that to me is less effective than asking them what did they think about their elbow or what did they think about their hand position or what did they think went wrong technically to get the ball where it got to. So that, to me, just instead of me telling them that what was wrong, challenging them to answer what was wrong, and they might not have an answer that time, but by putting that in their mind, you can then, on their next rep, if they get it wrong again, well, did you feel your hand that time? Did you feel your elbow that time? To me, that's the effective way to help somebody learn in that individual scenario.
Yeah. Or to get back strictly to the topic, change the design of the drill. So I was doing a drill once where I went with beach volleyball where we're working on cut shot with a particular player, and the drill was, it was one hitter hitting against two players. If she got a kill cross court on a cut shot, she got 5 points. If she got a kill going down the line, she got 1 point, and she had to get 15 points. And she just got 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, 1 point because she had a really good line shot. So the whole idea, I didn't want to take that away from her, but I wanted to force her to do things differently. So then after she won that, the next game was same rules, except we're playing to 1,005, and you get 100 points for every cut shot success. And she got 5 cut shots in a row, or whatever it was. It was just a way to try and get her to, slight change in the rules. Everything else is the same, but it helped. It gave her the confidence, I guess, to risk what she didn't want to risk.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this next question shifts the focus away from changing the rules to actually changing the equipment or the default settings of the court space. I coach 14-year-olds who haven't reached their full height or strength to learn how to hit. I often have them hit on lower net, 4 inches, or I guess that would be, about 10 centimeters, until they hit with pace and control. I can't tell if it helps them hit faster. Your thoughts?
So, I mean, in the skill literature, we call it action scaling. And so you're always wanting to scale the court, the ball, the task to somebody's action capabilities. So if you're doing something that is beyond what you're physically capable of, you'll come up with a different technique to do it because you can't use the right technique. So it's why we play on smaller courts as kids. It's why we have lower heights and softer balls as kids, because we're scaling the sport to what they're capable of at any given time. And I would always encourage that because it encourages techniques that are beneficial rather than almost these sort of faulty techniques to achieve the task. So, I mean, there's some great examples in the cricket literature, like sort of pitching type tasks, where if you get kids to pitch from a certain distance, they'll actually hurt their backs because they don't have the build to do it properly. And so by scaling the task, you get them to do something that's within their physical capability. So I would always encourage using different, scaling the equipment to get the technique and the learning that you encourage.
But at the same time, the one of the things that frustrates me is, sure, people still need to learn how to hit the ball over the net, and if they have to learn to hit the ball up so it goes over, then that's what they need to do. And often they'll actually learn to jump higher while they're doing it. So there's the trade-off there is if you get them hitting from net height, then, or if you lower the net too much, then when you're in a game, you've got no reason to put the little kids in the front court anymore because they've never learned how to hit the ball up and over the net, which is problematic. So both is really important.
So like all things, you would incorporate some of this and some of that and allow them to almost task switch so that they can maybe see if they can bring those good skills that they're learning from the lower height to a higher height, and then let them go back and forth again to sort of almost encourage that technique that is getting the outcome you want to that full scale equipment. Is that fair, Alexis?
Yeah, and just while we're talking about hitting, make sure that they're hitting towards the baseline, not trying to jam the ball straight down. because if they're up high and they can hit the ball down, that's great, but it's never going to happen in a game. Whereas if you can hit the ball over the net and deep, then if 14-year-old girls, you're going to win 98% of the rallies.
A lot. Yeah, the concern I would have in terms of if you're training on a lower net than you compete on, then okay, how much are you doing it? Is it you just do it sometimes, but then you switch back to the full-size net for additional training, kind of like the swapping that Daniel mentioned? Or are you just training on the lower net until everybody's comfortable hitting on the lower net, and then you shift them into the higher net, all the while your competitions are taking place on the higher net? That strikes me as probably problematic because now they're struggling to execute the skills that you want them to execute in the proper environment.
Long-term, short-term. I mean, most trainings I have will do some really standing on the ground, hitting back and forth to each other on the full, and just working on very, very, very specific technical stuff. But we'll do it for like 4 minutes. Every training for 4 minutes.
Okay. Question from Sue Gazansky. So you guys need to be on your A game here. How important is it that all levels... How important is it at all levels to train all players in all skills? For example, allow the libero to hit at times. Does it help the all-around game and game knowledge, volleyball IQ, etc., that sort of stuff?
Very, and yes.
So I mean, as a skill act person, I believe that the more skills you have, the better. And I find it hard to believe that in a game like volleyball, you can't learn all the skills that are involved in the sport. Like there aren't that many. We're not talking about like we're not talking about a sport like diving or something we're dealing with super difficult tasks. I feel like you can allow people to learn to do all the bits that are important because, especially in a team sport, simple things like learning how to hit for a libero allows them to better understand their teammates and why they want the ball put in a certain place and why they want things to happen in a certain time. So I find it hard to believe that any of that, the skill stuff, is not transferable in some way. I guess it just depends how much time you invest in is probably the bigger discussion.
The time is always the discussion, and that's, for every level, I think there's probably some levels that are less important for everyone to be doing things.
Quickly, is that the highest level that's less important?
Yes.
Yep.
I was trying to leave it a bit broad in case there might be some arguments for others that I haven't thought of. But to me, it's not so much. I think there is so much evidence that learning how to play, doing multiple skills, it goes back to all of the research about high-performing athletes doing multiple sports when they're younger, learning different stuff that involves tracking the ball, making decisions, is, from my understanding, from all of the research that I've done and from all of the smart people I've spoken to, really, really useful. The question then is, how important is winning? So we know that if you teach one person to do one particular thing, then it can help you. They will be able to keep doing that for maybe a week, and it might help you win on Tuesday. The question is how important that is. And my answer, because I've been fortunate, because partly it's the way I'm wired, but also I've been fortunate to work mostly in developmental programs. My answer is that it's not very important to win. You should do everything you possibly can to win during games, but as a coach, you create your own constraints. And so if your constraint is that you're going to make sure that everyone plays at least one full set, or make sure that everyone plays all around the court, then that's your constraint. You're still trying to win, but that's your constraint. And along the way, if you're teaching everyone to be able to do everything, then you're going to give each of those individual children the best opportunity to excel.
The thing I would toss in there is the motivation question, because I think it's probably a fairly reasonable statement to say that players like doing different skills outside of their own position. Sometimes you can't stop them doing different skills outside of their own position, like liberos hitting or middles setting. Those are the classic ones. Everybody knows leads want to hit, middles want to set. If you're doing it intentionally, then if you want to maintain that motivation, you probably need to make sure that you're giving them the opportunity to do it successfully and not just giving them some random chance where you're not thinking about what we talked about before in terms of that ratio of, success versus failure, where the frustration line might come in.
You're a coach, you coach. That's the thing.
Exactly.
It's like, and I disagree with you in some ways. I think liberos mostly do want to hit, but in my experience, middles never want to pass. And that's because they're scared of it, because they've never been taught how to do it. And that, to me, there was a post on BCT a couple of weeks ago about someone who's been in a program for 6 years and they still can't pass competently. Why not? Well, that's because their coaches didn't teach them to pass. It's black and white. It's not a discussion. Now, there's vaguely legitimate reasons why, but you can teach anyone to pass competently in 6 years. I'm sorry. And no matter how tall and uncoordinated and whatever, we talk competently. Yeah. We're not saying enough to hold down a P2 spot in a national team, but competently.
Right. All right. Feel free to submit any more questions. We don't have any right now, but I wanted to try to go through and summarize, especially since I was in and out like 4 different times because my internet kept dropping. Kind of summarize the conceptual idea of trying to develop effective and efficient drills is obviously you need to have a specific focus for whatever it is you're working on. You need to put it in the proper context You need to have some sort of feedback mechanism. There might be a scoring element to it, or some sort of, Daniel, you kind of brought up the idea of a consequence with the individuals. Am I missing anything?
I was thinking before that what Dan said, especially in terms of like doing a one-on-one session, asking the athlete what they want to work on. It's really intimidating because as a coach, you're supposed to walk in with a plan, right? It's bad coaching if you don't have your training plan written down on a piece of paper. So to just walk in and then make it up as you go along isn't what you're supposed to do. But to be able to do that is an incredibly useful skill as a coach. You might have a structure, but to be able to go in and change things because they're not achieving what you want them to achieve, you might end up with a completely different session, and that's fine. But to me, the outcome in terms of a drill, make it as close to real as you can. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, so I'm going to make this drill as close to real as I can. Then the other stuff comes from that, not the other way around. Not this is the slight technical change I want to make. How can I make this game-like? This has to be game-like. How can I achieve this? And the last thing is, how many different things can I shove into this drill that will also be learned? Absolutely. How much bang for my time can I get in this drill? If you've got someone standing in defence and they're going to dig a ball when it comes to them, that's good. That's feedback for the hitter, feedback for the defender. We were talking yesterday about serving drills when we were preparing for this. It's like serve. When you're serving, have passes. Just have passes there. Just even if you're not giving them feedback, it gives the servers feedback, and it means the passers can practice passing. Or better still, chuck a setter in there and have the setter set the ball as well. It's still serving practice because that's what you're focusing on. But the server is getting feedback on where the ball's going. The passer is learning how to pass. The setter is learning how to set. And all of a sudden it's volleyball. The focus is serving. It's a serving drill, but it's volleyball.
Yep.
Right. Okay, another question came in. This is basically, what are your thoughts on focusing on the development of weaknesses, so try to improve on weaknesses, versus working to develop on those things that you're already relatively good at, in particular as you're approaching competition?
I mean, my take on it is that, I would always work on somebody's weaknesses. I find consolidating strengths as an overrated way of saying let's all feel good about ourselves today because this is something we can already do and we can all like feel like we're making progress today because we just did some really good stuff. So I always believe that we should be focusing on our weaknesses and then just do a little bit of stuff for our strengths to give us that confidence. So in my mind, you'd probably do some task switching where you almost work on your weaknesses until, as we talked about, athletes become disengaged with it because it's too hard. Then you do a little bit of your strengths for a while so you get your confidence up, and then you switch back to weaknesses to then make use of the fact that you've gained that confidence again and you're going back. So for me, I find it a little bit overrated to consolidate our strengths whilst being aware of our glaring weaknesses. But that's me. I come from a place where I want really well-rounded athletes that are good at everything, and I know some people just like to become really good at one thing, almost like the video game character that that's really good at power but can't aim or do anything else.
I'd come at it from a completely different perspective. Volleyball is about winning points, and some points you win because you do something good, some points the other team wins because you do something bad. And so in terms of strengths and weaknesses, it's about how can you score points? and how do you stop the other team from scoring points? So one of the things that always blows my mind is that we know that serving, especially in junior girls, serving is the way most points are scored, either aces or errors. And the mentality then becomes, oh, well, let's work on serving so that we can become really good at that, and it becomes a strength. But from my perspective, serving aces isn't particularly hard against people that can't pass and don't have decent passing systems and structures. So as soon as you're competent at passing, a serving team will never be able to beat you again. And so it's a race to the next thing rather than anything else. So passing is a weakness of all junior teams because it's really, really hard to do. So work on passing, and then always work on your point scoring. And ultimately, point scoring is about being able to kill the ball when you're hitting. You'll get to a point where the other team can pass and can pass well enough that you're not getting 8 points from aces anymore. You're going to have to get those points from somewhere else. So in other words, work on everything. Work on the entire game. It takes serving's the easiest thing. 10-year-olds can learn to serve, but it's going to take you 3 years to learn to pass, and it's going to take you 5 years to learn to hit. So you've got to start them all at the same time.
Well, in a way, that you're basically saying work on your weaknesses. I mean, okay, you know your weaknesses. You can't receive, so got to work on that.
But I'm also saying work on hitting, and hitting is how you score points. That's an
even bigger weakness.
But it's got to be competent at the end. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Well, I think what Alexis is saying most importantly is that he's putting those skills within a context. So if you get back to drills, he's saying don't just work on your passing, but work on it within a context of receiving serves and then stopping kill shots, right? So we're not just, so the weaknesses that we're identifying are actually narrower than maybe what we originally said around my weakness is passing. Maybe my weakness is passing within this context, so we work on that rather than just these generic words.
Yep.
Okay.
And that gets back to Alexis' stuff of making it look like volleyball as much as he can, because he's talking about working on these weaknesses within a volleyball context, not just working on, I don't think they're very good at this.
Well, and the thing that I would say is your competitive context, I think, probably matters a lot in this conversation. So to Alexis' point of if you're working with a bunch of 10-year-olds, you probably shouldn't be thinking all that much about whether you're winning or losing. You should be working on developing the players. But if you're working with, a professional team, a highly competitive school team or something like that, where winning and losing clearly does matter in that context, then you have to look at it in terms of what are the things that are driving your success or lack of success, and where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So if you can take one of your strengths and get 15% better at it versus you can take one of your weaknesses and only get 10% better at it, assuming they have a roughly equal effect, then you're better off spending your time on your strength and improving that than on your weakness in that scenario. So this is one of the art of coaching sort of things is you got to figure out where you're going to get the most influence.
Yeah, and look, you could be much more specific than that. And normally the exercise I do in coaches courses is how are you going to win 25 points? How are you going to get them? Right, and so there's a team I used to work with, beach volleyball team, so we're going for 21 points. They were a world championship medal winning team. So at the very, very highest level, everything was about how we're going to get our points today. So they weren't a big blocking team, so we need to get one block. We need to get 3 good touches off the block that we can transition. We need to get 2 aces, and they'll probably give us 2 errors. And so that means we need to get 15 kills. And so I'm offside out. And so it's just putting it together like that. And everything about training revolved around being able to do that.
Yeah, I guess a reasonable way to look at it. All right, no more questions in at this point. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we cut them loose?
Think about what you're doing and get the most out of your time. Can you get more out of your session?
And for me, it's about don't be stuck doing something because that's the way it's supposed to be done. Have what you're trying to achieve as the key goal, and then manipulate the task people are doing to get that outcome.
Okay. And the other thing I would toss in there is that I see a lot of questions in a lot of coaching discussions. I need a drill 4.
Yeah.
You don't need a new drill 4, probably. You either have one that you can already use for that task, and maybe you just haven't thought of it that way, or you can design something yourself, which has kind of been the main focus of what we've been talking about here.
Yeah. And it takes practice and it takes skill and experience.
Yep.
And just like it's okay for our athletes to fail, it's okay for a coach to put in a new drill that sucks and go, that didn't work, scrap it, let's move on.
The best, most clever, I spent days working out this drill once based on analysis of hundreds of matches of how points are scored, how they're scored on serve receive, kills, blocks, serves. It was fantastic. I ran it once and threw it away because it was too complicated. I was so disappointed. And I stuck with it way longer than I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, John Spera has talked repeatedly in sessions that he's done about he is perpetually on the lookout for the perfect drill, and he hasn't found it yet. So if he hasn't found it yet, what chance do the rest of us have? So we just got to keep working on it. All right. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for turning up for the questions. Hopefully,
thanks, everyone.
We'll
thanks for the opportunity. And I should say, actually, in my board times, I put together a blog called Volleyball Drill Doctor. So if you look at that, the whole idea is to look at drills that are on video and try and work out how you can make them better. So, yeah, have a look at that. Maybe give you some ideas on the sort of stuff that we're talking about.
Very good. Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier.